All right, everybody, welcome to today's plant clinic. David's going to be covering pruning today, and I am about to send out a link in the chat to a pruning sheet, which has a breakdown of a bunch of different plants and information on pruning for each of those. I know some people have difficulty accessing these in this format, so we'll be following up again after the call, probably tomorrow, with the spreadsheet. And then if you still can't access it, then email me and I'll figure out another format to send it to you in. That usually covers all of our bases. All right. So for anybody who is new and has not attended these plant clinics before, welcome. This is a webinar format. So if you have questions, you're actually going to type those into the Q&A box. And this is going to be a big class today. So David and I were talking beforehand about how usually he goes for about 45 minutes. We are expecting to go closer to the full hour today. And I believe we're going to hold all of our questions until the end. Is that accurate, David?
That's
Did I say
correct.
that? Yes. Okay. Because just pruning is a big topic. So we want to make sure he has time to get you guys all the information that you need. If you have any questions or issues during the class, please feel free to send me a chat or a question. I will be watching that throughout. And we are recording this class. So if you need to leave for any reason, that will go up on our YouTube channel, generally within about 24 hours. All right. That covers everything on my end. David, I'll let you get started.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. It's such a beautiful day outside. I know you'd probably be happier out there in the garden working, but that's good. We're just going to take a little bit of your afternoon, and then I'm going to leave you this huge to-do list that you can go out and get to work on right away. Because as Sally had mentioned, we're going to discuss pruning today, and what I'm focusing on are mostly shrubs, small trees and shrubs that you would be pruning right now, today. Really, a lot of this, I think the middle of winter, January and February is the ideal time to do it, but was all set to go a couple weeks ago, and then because of an illness, had to cancel that. So now I'm just trying to emphasize what we're talking about today is like, you don't need to wait. You don't really want to wait too long. You want to take the information that we share today and go outside and get to work on that. And like I said, we've got these nice temperatures, so it's a good time to do that. Uh, I said, we've got plenty of time to cover this, but I was telling Sally, you usually have a lot of questions involved, and I like to provide sometimes a little, or plenty enough detail on exactly how and what to prune. So my schedule here is, like I said, I'm going to go through, kind of got a bunch of slides because I think with pruning, it's something you have to see. You can't really describe or tell. It's something seeing. So I've got examples of small trees and flowering shrubs, different pruning techniques, and I want to take our time to go through that. And then, like I said, we'll open up to take your calls through the chat, and we'll stay here for, like I said, next hour, and hopefully get all of your questions answered. So I think that's pretty much it. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Great. I'd like to begin by saying I am talking about pruning with your feet on the ground. Uh, I don't want to see anything with people going up on ladders, climbing trees, doing anything like that. So if we're talking about pruning shade trees or trees that you actually have to, get off the ground to do it, that's when I want you to call an arborist. So that is not today's topic. That's something I'll just tell you to call an arborist. They do have, arborists do have a certification process where you can ask for what they call an ISA, that stands for International Society of Arboriculture, Certified Arborist. That means that they have a minimum level of experience, they've signed a code of ethics, they've passed an exam, demonstrating their competency in tree care. And so if you have big trees, shade trees that need care and attention, call an arborist. That's not today's topic. First of all, we really want to make sure that we are safe about what we're doing. Secondly, why are we pruning plants? The plants, our trees and shrubs, do not require pruning. we prune them to make them the plants that we want them to be. I was in a class with Jake Hendy, arborist for Smithsonian. I really liked the way he said that because it captures a lot of my thoughts when he said, we're pruning to make them the plants that we want them to be. So before you pick up a pair of shears or clippers or a saw, think about what and why you're doing this. Most of the time when I'm pruning or talking to you about pruning, most of the time is because the plants are getting too large for the space that we've provided. That really is an issue of plant selection, which takes me back to another good arborist friend of mine, Peter Deal, would say, what's the most important tool? The most important tool that you could have when you start pruning, I say, it's here. It's your brain, it's your thinking, it's having a plan and knowing. So a lot of this really begins with your plant selection. And if the plant's outgrowing that space, maybe it wasn't the best choice of plant or placed correctly. But we're talking about real life. And in real life, we inherit plants, or we make mistakes, or time goes by. There's 1,000 different reasons why, but a lot of times we do need to go in and reduce the size on plants that are getting a little bit larger. If we are on top of our game, what we would really prefer is that we are pruning to maintain the size, so that we're doing pruning more frequently to maintain our landscape plants in good condition, as opposed to allowing them to get overgrown and then reduce the size that's there. We also go in there because it might be a matter of shaping or sculpting the plant. So these are kind of all aesthetic considerations. We'll talk about some plants where the pruning can influence their flowering. And there are times where we can improve the plant's health. With young trees in particular, and those are the ones I've talked about most because they're small. We're in the nursery business, recently planted. If you have trees that were been planted in the ground for like the past 5 years or something, we can develop a good structure in that. So we might be pruning for structural strength and integrity in there. In some cases, we might be pruning out branches that were damaged because of an insect or disease problem. So this does, the pruning, proper pruning does help the plant when it's done correctly in terms of improving its structure, improving its health. But like I said, primarily we're doing it for management of its size, its shape, and those kind of things. So all good reasons, but I don't want you to feel obligated. If there's a tree in the backyard and it looks beautiful and it looks healthy and everything's good, just enjoy it. You don't have to go out and do any of this. Couple terms that I'm going to be using. Many times, most of the time, when I'm pruning to improve the structure or the branching, eliminating crossing branches, this kind of thing, what I'm really talking about is thinning. And when I say thinning, I'm removing an entire branch, or I'll use the word twigs because they don't have to be large size. But as my little diagram goes in there, I'm actually thinning out branches. I'm selectively removing branches. So as I talk about thinning or selective thinning, that's typically what I mean. Heading, which I'm over here, you'll see where these little tips are being cut off. There are times when we do this sort of heading cut, that might be actually to promote branching, because where we make these cuts, it makes these lateral buds start to grow out more. So there are times when we want our plants to be thicker, bushier, fuller, where we might do more of these heading type cuts out of the tips. Whereas a lot of times if it's on small trees, we're doing more of this kind of structural thinning that's there. So as I said, the best way to demonstrate this or to explain it, I think, is by just showing one. And many of you have probably seen some of these pictures before. These are pruning jobs that I had done some time ago, but they're oldies but goodies. So this is a weeping red bud. You can see they're planted in front of a townhouse. Beautiful specimen plant. It was selected for that spot because that sculpted, cascading, weeping form that it has. Flowers for us in very early spring. typically in April. Maybe we'll see blooms in March this year. And then also you have that just distinctive form as it leaves out through the growing season. So this had been the ground several years. It's really doing its job. There's nothing wrong with this. But the owner had asked me for a little bit of guidance on pruning. Essentially what they were was they didn't know what to do. They felt like it needs pruning, but I don't want to mess it up, and I'm not sure exactly what to do. In fact, this was one of my colleagues that used to work here years ago, who had a degree in landscape architecture, but when it came down to some of the hands-on stuff, she didn't want to make mistakes or anything wrong. So what we did, Amy Strunk is her name, and so we looked this over together. And before we start making any cuts, this means before we have any pruners in our hands, we're setting up a plan of action, right? We're selecting goals, we're kind of setting our objectives for this, and we're discussing how and what we want to cut, because they are all judgment calls. And I'm going to go back to my before picture here. When I'm looking at this tree and I'm evaluating, what I see is a beautiful structure in here. If I look at this and I see this branch cascading out off that, another branch cascading these out. So when I look at this plant, what my goals or what my objectives are is I love this cascading weeping form, almost like a fountain is kind of what I visualize coming out of there. And I want to accentuate that. I don't want to do anything to disturb that. I want to accentuate it. But as you look in there, there's a lot of secondary growth, as this, what I'm going to call this sort of congested look, whereas you just can't see the best form of the plant. So here, it's the right size. I'm okay with the size of it and everything like that. My goal is to really thin out these branches, accentuate the form and shape of the tree. And that's what we're looking at. It's talking about which one of these branches needs to go, which one of these branches are going to stay. So after we sort of come to this agreement on exactly what our goals are, what our objectives are, we will start pruning. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do everything. So on trees, I'm saying trees, this applies to woody shrubs, woody plants in general. Every time we cut them, every time we wound them, that is an injury. It's a wound. Now, plants have adapted ways that they can respond to wounds. Plants have adapted to ways they are shedding organisms. So they shed leaves, they shed branches. So they have these adaptations of ways of coping with that. And the way we do it is, if you look very closely on here, if you're looking at a tree, you'll start to see what's called this branch collar, right? This little swollen area. Again, to me, I always think of like this. It's like, kind of like your shoulder joint. You can actually see how this branch is fused together. If you were to cut through here and do a diagram, you can see this is where the branches emerge. That branch is actually connected into the main trunk of the tree, this growth that's out there. And it has this little swollen, enlarged area that's there. So what we call a branch collar that goes through it. And in some trees it's easier and some is harder to see. This is where the tree has naturally evolved and adapted to shed that branch. It has a way of what we call compartmentalizing any decay that occurs in there. So when we injure this tree, this shows where this branch was cut off, and I have this little tiny pocket of decay. Essentially, the tree isolates that, compartmentalizes it, seals it over, and life goes on wonderfully. If I injure that collar, like in the old days, we used to do like this straight down cut, might be called a flush cut. If I injure that branch collar, I have now disrupted this tree's ability to compartmentalize or defend or wall off that decay, and that decay will continue to spread back into the main trunk that's here. So that's the other thing I want to say before we actually start pruning is identify where these branch collars are, and with your cuts, we want to do everything possible not to injure that. So our goal is we want to cut alongside that branch collar. Don't want to leave a stub, but we also don't want to create a wound or injury that's going to lead to decay. So this shows a lace bark elm out in our parking lot here. Uh, we had removed some of the lower branches off of here just to allow traffic and vehicles to pass underneath. And you can see what happens. So this what looks like this little enlarged area, that is the branch collar area. And if you look real closely and use your imagination, each year this forms a new layer of wood, right? Each year it puts on a layer of wood. Second year it forms a layer of wood. Third year forms a layer of wood. So it took for this wound, it took about 5 years to be completely 100% sealed, but this did seal itself up. The tree is compartmentalized any decay in there. That's a good pruning cut. Here's another one that came off and that sealed over completely. That's what we want to see. That's a good thing. Here, that branch collar was injured, so this tree was not able to seal or close that wound up, and you can see a little hollow created inside there. Now, this isn't the end of the world. A lot of wildlife requires these hollows. So just like this little tree frog, to them, this becomes a home. It could be bats, squirrels, woodpeckers, owls, bluebirds. A lot of our natural wildlife needs these hollows to exist and occur. So I guess not to confuse things, we don't want to cause injuries. We don't want these things to happen, but they do occur naturally. Branches break in storms, that kind of thing. If you find these cavities and hollows that are in there, that's not the end of the world. It's wildlife needs that. Our habitat needs them. I'm trying to encourage people, if it's in the back of your property, if it's not a problem, you've got trees that are decaying or dying, leave them be, because there's so much life that does require that. At the same time, that's a structural defect. It means now that tree's more vulnerable to damage, injury. So I don't want to create these damages, but it's not the end of the world either. Don't want to create those wounds. Now, I'm going to get back to my tree with all that kind of background talk. So step one, the way I like to do this, and it's not right or wrong, I find this the easiest way, and I think easiest way to explain. So as Amy and I were looking at the tree, our first step is, hey, let's remove any dead branches. That to me is kind of like a no-brainer. We're going to go in. This tree over the years, it has some dead branches. You can see what she's doing here. She's cutting through a dead branch. This shows you a branch had been removed. That branch collar is still there intact. It will seal itself up. You see this one where a little stub was left in place. That kind of prevents it from sealing. So I don't want to cause any injuries. I don't want to leave any stubs. That's a nice, good pruning cut right there. After I have gone through and removed the dead branches, because that's kind of the easy stuff, now I go in, and this is what we're talking about. I start removing some of those branches that were crossing and rubbing, because this tree, the way it's formed, it's going all these different directions. Some of these branches are crossing over top of each other. I'm really trying to create a little more of this cascading outwards type of look. I will mention, as you saw earlier, 95% of the pruning we're talking about today, you can do with these two tools. A good pair of hand pruners that will normally cut branches that might be up to 3/4 inch diameter. If it's more than that 3/4 inch diameter, I reach for a pruning saw. But really, these two tools will allow you to do pretty much everything that you're seeing here today. So now you start to see these pruning cuts here. You see these little areas where that wood is exposed. This is where you can imagine there was a branch that was coming over here. We're just trying to remove that direction. That collar is still in there, but we're starting to thin this out. Again, that's what I'm talking about, this selective thinning, where I'm taking out crossing branches, rubbing branches, branches that are detracting from the overall shape of the tree. So again, you can see where I took a pruning cut here, but we're going through here, leaving all this place. We've gotten down to where I feel like I'm leaving a pretty nice structure in there we're getting pretty close to what I call finished. So I removed the dead branches. I removed some of the crossing, the rubbing branches, the things that I felt were a detraction from the tree. This is where we're getting towards our finished product. I think this might even be it. After I have done my structural pruning, then I might go in and do just a little bit of cosmetic pruning, a little bit of shaping. That's my after. That's where I might go down here and shorten up some of these out the tips. But so this is what we have. The nice thing about doing a pruning in the winter is you can see the structure of the branching. You don't have all the foliage and leaves kind of taken away from it. There's no sap flowing in there. There's no insect activity. There's no real disease activity. So again, this is really a great time of year to do it. I like to do that before the growth has started. A lot of our trees, because of the warm weather and stuff, are getting an early start this year. So get to it. This is the next spring. I'm going to call that mission accomplished. I thought this turned out beautifully. You can see it flowering there with some of the leaves that are going. So that's really for a small tree. And whether that is a weeping maple, everybody's trying to figure out what to do with those. Here is a weeping redbud. You can show, yes, you can prune them. You could use these exact same concepts if it was just a dogwood or almost any other tree in your garden. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk more about shrubs. Shrubs, it's all the same ideas, the same concepts, same ideas. But here what I'm doing is I'm going to talk about thinning out some of the older branches. So if I have a multi-stem shrub, is shown here, a lot of times over the years, that older growth may become less productive in terms of its flowering, its blooming. You may get to where there's so much growth within that plant, you're not getting good air circulation, you're not getting the maximum sun in there. And simply by opening up this canopy, you can kind of rejuvenate or renew the plant. One example might be, I have this red twig dogwood back here behind me. The very young juvenile growth on that is the brightest, deepest red color. As that branch gets to be about 3 years old, then it starts to get brown and woody. Nothing wrong, that's the normal growth of it, but we, again, because we want it to be the plant we want it to be, I might go in there and periodically do some thinning to keep that young juvenile growth in there. Another great example is I'm talking about crepe myrtle. So this is the natural form of a crepe myrtle, what I'm going to call a multi-stem tree. So this is, to me, you can see where somebody's gone in and thinned out some of those branches. This is an example of good pruning where they have maintained the natural form of the tree, allowed that natural shape that's in there, but thinned it out. So cosmetically, aesthetically, you can see the structure, you can see the branching. To me, it looks a little prettier by allowing better air circulation through there. Maybe we can cut down a little bit on some of the mildew problems. To me, that's a pretty nice looking plant. And this would be the same effect that we see as it flowers in the summer. So that is, again, the way I prefer to see them pruned and kept in a more naturalized style. One thing I didn't get into, but crepe myrtles, or didn't see here, crepe myrtles, of course, they produce these little woody seed capsules that often persist up here. If you want to go in there and clean them out, more power to you. If you don't feel like you want to do that, don't feel that you absolutely have to. I'm also want to introduce to you what I call a renewal pruning. So another option that we have is some of our plants that grow really vigorously, really fast, get really big, or plants, like I say, like the red twig dogwood. We do a similar thing with roses. A lot of plants in our landscape, we can rejuvenate them. They're old, they're overgrown, they've gotten too large and not producing as well, a bunch of different possibilities. There are some plants that we can go in and really just cut them down like you see here, you'll get these multiple stems start to redevelop and then thin them out as we go. Again, not trying to say right or wrong or anything. It's just a question of what your goals, what your objectives are. So here is crepe myrtle. If you look, you see where this line is right across all these, boom, 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 boom. This is an example of what I'm calling that renewal or rejuvenation pruning. This is the entrance to a subdivision, and the landscaper made their choice. They're probably getting big, getting leggy, not creating the effect they want. So they went in one winter, just bump, 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 cut across here to straight line. They responded by producing all these shoots. And then I'm sure they went in there periodically and thinned them out to get this kind of a look going. And here again is the finished product. You know, again, this is probably within a few years, doesn't happen instantly, probably about 3 years after the renewal pruning was done. And they've got back to looking this really nice effect that's in there. So I see all this talk that's on the, Facebook and the internet, all kinds of people talking about pollarding, renewal pruning, naturalizing, all these kinds of, again, I don't take sides in what is the right or the wrong way to do any of this. It's really comes down to what your goals, what your objectives are. I thought this was a pretty cool example of, I'm going to say kind of almost a combination of the two examples. This is again crepe myrtle in a business park that you can see. They just gotten too big for the location they were in. They weren't really serving their purpose. So here the landscape company came in, did a pretty hard, what I'm going to call topping or rejuvenation type pruning on them. They didn't bring them down as low as the ones we looked at before, but let's say I bring them down to this height of maybe it's about 10 feet that's in that picture. They also went in and thinned out some of the branches. So I'm saying we're doing both the rejuvenation and the thinning in combination. This is the same planting that same summer in July. So it doesn't go work with every plant, but a real vigorous grower like crepe myrtles allows you to do that pruning. Again, it's not as naturalized. I showed you in that first picture. What I like is a more naturalized look. But I thought, hey, this is kind of a nice compromise, middle of the road, and I'm trying to give you the freedom to do what you think is going to work best in your circumstances. Okay, so before you start cutting, this I'm going to say you do want to know what your plants are, what you're working with. A lot of times pruning can influence their flowering and how they grow afterwards. What's happening in your landscape, we look at this obviously have a diagram of a twig here. We call it apical bud, right? The terminus at the tip of there. Usually plants have a little bit larger bud, and this, as it breaks growth in spring, is going to determine where that new growth is. So my diagram shows it sets that terminal bud, and that might be end of that year. Next spring, the new growth starts to pop out. It comes up here, sets another terminal bud, and then the year so on, so on. A lot of our ornamental shrubs, this is trees also, they produce a flower bud the previous year. So a lot of plants, I'm going to use, in this case, I'm going to talk about viburnum. So this viburnum that we see here, we can see it put this growth on, it set that apical bud, but this is a flower bud. Your flower buds are usually much larger. You'll look at it, and when you look closely, you'll see this on azaleas, you'll see it on viburnums, you'll see it on dogwoods. This terminal bud is significantly larger. That's a flower bud. So you'll want to have that knowledge, because if I go in there and I prune them now, as I'm instructing you, you will be cutting the flowers off. That's totally fine, doesn't hurt the plant. It's just a question of making sure that that's the decision that you want to make. So if I talked about crepe myrtle earlier, that's what we talk about flowering on new wood. Crepe myrtle does not have any flower buds. If I go out and I prune it today, it starts growing usually towards late April, May, and then it produces flower buds all in that same growing season. So it's flowering on new growth. Many of our other plants are spring bloomers, particularly like this viburnum. It produced that flower bud last year in August. It carries that bud through the winter, and then it's going to open for us in spring. So you don't even absolutely have to know the plant, but you do need to be able to identify these buds. So this is a vegetative bud. That's going to produce leaves. This is a flower bud that's going to produce blossoms. So many of our spring flowering plants that I'm telling you, let's wait and prune after they flower. So, and I think about the Andromeda here, right? Japanese Andromeda, Pierce japonica. They have their flower buds on them. So I really don't want to cut those flower buds off. So I'm not going to prune those. Azaleas, camellias, lilacs, mountain laurel, rhododendrons. Some of our hydrangeas are kind of a mess because they have some that grow on new, some that bloom on old, but things like the oak leaf hydrangea, climbing hydrangea, the big leaf, which is often called, or the macrophylla hydrangeas, those already have flower buds on them. So you just have to consider that. You can prune them, but it will cost you blossoms. So you're making that informed decision that's in there. So these you might want to hold off on, but again, that's personal choice. Another thing, so I'm all over the place here, I know, talking about timing and methods of pruning and stuff, but it will make sense. Is sometimes I'm going to talk about shearing. These are more those heading cuts that we talked about. When I shear the plant, like we're cutting with scissors there, I'm shaping it. It also induces the plant to produce a profusion of growth and tips. So on evergreens, where we are doing hedges or sculpting them or shaping them, we will do this. Again, this is all aesthetics because we want to shape them or manipulate their growth, increase the density that's in there. So we're just boom, boom, cutting those tips off. Now, where this becomes a little bit of an issue, and I'm telling you, you have to make decisions there on this. So we talked about viburnum, right? Today, they have their flower buds on there. So if you were to go out there and shear your viburnum like this is basically the effect that you get. Most of those tips, most of those flower buds were cut off of this plant at the time that somebody decided to shear it. This plant is the same plant, same species, but we did not prune it in there. Me, if I have a choice, I know which one I'm going with. It's like, here, it looks like a shrub. It looks naturalized. It's loaded with fragrant blossoms are on here. This, it's just a geometric form randomly sitting out there with no blooms. So again, both the method and the timing of pruning can affect this. If I have a viburnum, I'm probably going to do selective thinning on that. And I might even wait and do that after it flowers to preserve the blooms. Again, no harm done to the plant. They're both healthy plants, just a different outlook on. All right, so now I'm going to switch gears, talk a little bit about evergreens, and then we're going to open up the chat for all your questions. Evergreens can be tricky. If we're talking about a conifer, a needled evergreen like this, all of their growth emerges from this terminal bud that's near, right? So we see buds here, we see buds here, we see buds here. If I go further down that branch, if I'm a mugo pine or something, as I go down this branch, you'll start to see we don't have as many tips, we don't have the buds. And if I was to cut back into here, It's why I say I go in there and I remove these branch tips. I create a bald spot that's in there. That is not going to fill back in. It does not regenerate the new growth from there. So if I'm looking sometimes at, you know, cypress and junipers and pines and spruce, if they get too big, they get too large, I cannot really go in and do this kind of renewal pruning. So we see this all the time, right? Gold mops. It's a beautiful, hardy, tough juniper, cascading, you know, delicate foliage, bright golden color. They get bigger than you expect. People plant them as a cute little plant that might be, think it's going to stay 2 or 3 feet tall. It grows out. Next thing you know, it's 8 or 9 feet wide. I cannot rejuvenate that. If I have to reduce its size, it's just not capable of coming back out. On a broadleaf evergreen, and this could be like hollies and laurels, to some extent boxwoods and everything. These, they have buds all the way down this branch, buds, 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 and they'll go all the way down. So I can cut this back as far as I want to, and it will resprout, it will grow back through. So, good example. These are Burford hollies. Real vigorous, you know, sturdy Chinese holly that's there. They had this down at American University on their campus. They definitely know what they're doing down there. They had grown to be quite large. They were literally just kind of obstructing this garden view, obstructing this area, and creating kind of a dark, creepy place back here rather than a nice, serene walking kind of space. So they made the decision on these old plants, this one time, this heavy renewal pruning. They went in, cut these things down to a height about 8 inches, right? You might take note, there's a stone and a little Japanese maple back there. You can see what happens of, there's my little stone, my little Japanese maple back in that corner. You can see all these hollies filling back in. So on hollies, we can do this, no problem. You know, they respond really well. And you don't have to be this drastic. They could have cut it down to 12 inches, 2 feet tall, whatever you want. But again, these do really well with that. If this was a juniper or something, it would not do quite so well. These are boxwood. What I have found, so they're broadleaf plants. You would say, hey, I can do this heavy renewal pruning on them. But this is a slower growing, less vigorous plant. They just don't have the same growth rate and vigor that like a Chinese holly does. So I'm very, very hesitant to do that kind of renewal pruning on boxwoods. This is down James Monroe's home, Montpelier, and the boxwoods, you know, it's old estate. They've gotten large, they've gotten overgrown. They're doing the best they can at managing this, trying to sort of shear them along this to maintain that open walking space. I would be reluctant, as they are. I don't want to go in and do this real heavy renewal pruning. If I do, then I'm also taking a chance of killing James Monroe's boxwoods, and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be the guy that carries that with me. So what they're doing is with boxwoods, a lot of times we like to thin them out. We might create these gaps, these holes, these openings in there. And here they're combining with some shearing to maintain that formality and doing the best we can in managing their size. So this would be a very good example of what I call thinning, where we are going in here. This is not quite so overgrown. This is what we would like to do probably on an annual basis, not let them get so big, but go in. This gives you an idea of how somebody's going in, thinning out these selective kind of branches that open up that canopy, allow for better air, water, air circulation within there, more leaf surface, more photosynthetic vigor, just a whole lot of good things going, and also maintaining that natural form. This is a insularis boxwood, little hedge in my front yard where it kind of went through and combined these techniques. It doesn't have to be one or the other. All these holes, these openings that you see in there, I created those intentionally. This hedge was growing out over the sidewalk. And I wanted to push it back within bounds, back behind the sidewalk. That was my goal, my intention. I want to maintain a little bit of that formality, that uniformness in there. So I thinned them, then I sheared them. You start to see, this is where I stuck my bone down inside the plant. I'm inducing more growth, kind of rejuvenation that's in there. It's going to be helping improve the health of the plant, rejuvenate it. And then this you can see is that same hedge finished kind of product after it's grown back in there. So one last little picture I'm going to show you, and then we'll get to our questions. I told you our needled evergreens can't really do this. So if we're trying to maintain them and maintain the size, when these terminal buds start to branch out, what we call the candle season, you can go in and tip these back. So if you're on a Christmas tree farm and you see these sheared plants that are grown for density, they'll go in with shears and literally just kind of cut these tips off. So I might, for different reasons, decide I want to thin, one or two of them out. I might want to just cut the tips. I might want to cut it here or here. But the way we can maintain them is by limiting the expansion of these new candles that's on there. But if it gets too big, just like on this juniper, and I cut back into this old growth where there is no development, that creates a bald spot that is not going to fill back in. Eventually, this green growth will grow back out and cascade over. It will disguise it. So again, I don't think there was any bad decisions made here, but just you have to know that when making your pruning decisions. Okay. So this was a cool little plant, this specimen plant that's put in. This is a dwarf blue spruce back here that you see. This is a weeping Norway spruce. And these two plants were grafted together and put on what we call standard, elevated up. Again, the owner just didn't know what to do with this plant and just let it grow. It got way too big and now it's obstructing the view of the house and starting to come to the walk, that kind of stuff. So in this case, again, I talked with our client. We talked through all this and discussed it, saying, hey, if I make this cut, that's it. There's no going back. It's not going to rejuvenate. But my goal here, again, is I want to bring these into proportion. The weeping spruce, which is dominating the blue spruce portion, I want to sort of subdue that. I want to try to open it up so the blue spruce component can kind of become back more 50-50 balanced like it was. And also bring its size down a little more in proportion with the area. So we had pretty clear goals. Understood there were kind of risks involved, but just went for it. To me, turned out surprisingly well. You can see we brought the size of this down by at least a third, maybe even more than that. You see the blue spruce kind of creeping out here. And then the idea is to gradually work on this to get it back into proportion over the next 2 or 3 years. So this is where I will get rid of my pictures and we will take your questions. How are we doing, Sally?
We're doing well. Let me just, perfect. Let me scroll back up to the beginning. Just a quick reminder for everybody, if we don't get to all of your questions today, you can always follow up with us. David's happy to take questions at the plant clinic, or you can call your closest store. And I will begin. All right, our first question is about azaleas. Like the bloomathons and the encores that bloom throughout the year. This person's azaleas are overgrown and need trimming back. What is the best time to prune your azaleas that bloom a few times during the year?
So they will respond really well to pruning. You can bring them back, securely to whatever height, shape, size that you want to do with that. I do prefer hand pruning, that kind of selective thinning style on. But let's wait and do that after their first set of blooms. So they typically put on a really big display of color in April. Enjoy that. As soon as that April flowering is done, then go in to do your pruning. So what I was trying to do is kind of say, hey, this is kind of winter pruning. If schedules work out, my goal is to kind of do spring pruning, and we will talk about how to manage azaleas. But yes, go for it, but not yet. The flower buds are on there today. You've been waiting a long time, so just hang in there a few more weeks, enjoy the flowers, and then go for it. Whatever height, shape, or size you choose.
Okay. All right. Next question. How would you prune a mahonia or a butterfly bush? So we have two different plants there.
They are so Mahonia. I'm trying to think. I consider more of a multi-stemmed tree. So if you remember back to that diagram I didn't have the actual plant, but it showed a diagram with multiple stems. What we'll do on Mahonia, and this is also with the way you would manage some of the more upright forms of Nandina, as they grow and they get older, they get leggy, right? They're growing, growing, and one day you wake up and all the growth is up here at the tips and it's kind of naked all the way down. So at this time of year, you would actually go in and remove some of the oldest stems. And by doing that, if I remove one or two of the oldest stems, that induces the plant to start sending up new growth. So again, the idea is it's the best way is to make a habit of doing this, around March of every year. Go in there, just take out some of the oldest stems. And so we keep renewing the plant with new growth coming back into it. So yeah, little at a time. And if you do this, you're constantly renewing the plant. They maintain their natural shape and form, and it looks great. And it's easy.
Alrighty, question about tools. Do you need to sharpen the pruning saw?
I don't think sharpening the pruning saw is really practical. When I said sharpening saws is a very, very specialized thing. I don't know how to do it. There are people that sharpen saws, but they're extremely difficult to find. You're better off just getting a new blade, is my opinion. So, like I'm showing you Felco, but this is true of any of them. In the little folding saws, what I like, they're convenient. But there's just one little nut that's in here. It's as easy as could be. We sell replacement blades for the Felco saws. You just take that little nut out, you slip a new blade in, and you're back in business. Trying to find somebody that would do the sharpening for you, I don't even know where I wouldn't where to begin to look for.
Okay. Next question. How do you keep a gold mop false cypress to a smaller size if they haven't already gotten huge?
And I have to say that I'm reminiscing a bit, but Sally, believe it or not, I'm old enough to remember there were trucks that would go through the neighborhood. It would actually do saw sharpening for you. And some of
Oh, really?
my age group or older might remember that, but I think that's all a thing of the past.
Nice. We get,
so if
you
I
get to
had,
keep stuff longer that way.
yeah, but if I, yeah, well, that's when we kept things. We didn't just throw them out. And
Yeah.
So if I have plants like a gold mop cypress, I do this, with Hinoki cypress. What you can prune them, but you need to do what I'm going to call maintenance pruning. Again, this is the perfect time of year to go out. You can go out and cut tips off of there. So if you look at a cypress, imagine this cypress. You have 1 year growth, you have 2 year growth, your 3-year-old growth is kind of bald and empty. So I can prune out here at the tips. I can prune when it's green. I just have to make sure that I prune some green tips. So I can go in there with hand shears, preferably because I like their natural form, take some tips out of there, do some thinning, and try to maintain them at a given size. And they respond beautifully to it. Where we get in trouble is if that plant becomes so overgrown and it's so large that taking 4 inches or 6 inches off of it is not going to get the job done. I need to reduce it by 2 or 3 feet. And that's just not going to happen. But
Okay.
yeah, go out there just with your hand shears, do little tips, pruning, shaping. Feel confident in doing it. Just make sure you leave some green growth on there. If you cut back in an old dead branch, sometimes you might need to do that, but you're going to be left with an old dead branch.
Okay. Here's a question about boxwoods, and I know you covered boxwoods, but this is fairly specific. Okay, so this person's boxwoods lost their rounded shape because the leaves at the center, at the very top, dried out. Presumably, I'm assuming they must have died. How do I prune them to promote growth in that area of the plant? Are there any other measures you recommend?
So this, I don't know how helpful this answer is going to be or not. I found it depends a lot on what type of boxwood it is. Mostly the ones about is really the English boxwood, like the old English boxwoods. They're very slow growing. Those I'm a lot more cautious on how I prune them because again, they just don't have that kind of vigor. They don't respond as well. If it happens to be some of these newer hybrid types, something like Green Mountain or anything, you can prune those pretty easily. So you might want to bring pictures and samples in, see if we can help you identify exactly which it is. But you can boxwoods, you can thin them and you can shear them if it's one of these more vigorous varieties. If it's an English boxwood, it's just going to take a little bit of thinning type cuts, stingy pruning, and over time. And this is a good time of year to be doing that. I pruned my boxwoods 2 weeks ago.
So good to have an idea on which type of boxwood you have before moving forward. Is that?
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's my kind of long-winded way of saying I don't really want to ask that question until we get the boxwood identified.
Gotcha.
You can try sending me pictures of it. It's best if we have pictures and samples at the plant clinic and see you in person.
Okay. Oh, righty. Next question. Will a Japanese holly respond well if I give it a renewal pruning?
Oh yeah, yeah. No,
Okay.
they are real easy that way.
That's good. All right. How to prune a magnolia that's close to the house? Can we reduce the spread by cutting the trunks laterally from the bottom?
Two things I want to say. One is I keep saying, oh yeah, you can do that. You can prune that, no problem. I'm gonna have to put a little qualifier in there. If like that Japanese holly, if it's in healthy, vigorous, good condition, then the answer is yes.
Okay.
Sometimes people bring me plants that are sick, that are declining. They're in such compromised health to begin with that I may say no because I don't feel that plant has enough strength or vigor to respond to pruning. But in general, yes. Magnolia, I'm going to assume that we're talking about a southern magnolia. They do respond to pruning. I'm trying to think through when you say, did you say cutting like through the trunk?
Yeah, it said laterally. Hang on. I haven't had geometry in a while, so laterally across, right?
Not liking the sound of that too much.
Laterally from the bottom.
Uh,
The idea is to reduce the spread of the tree. So I'd be curious to see photos. I'm
yeah,
saying that
yeah.
I'm just
So
having
you
trouble
can,
envisioning, but I'm not gonna good at geometry or any of that.
so you can prune magnolias, but I want to bring them from the tips back, and that's why I'm trying to understand the question a little bit. So if it's like this, I can prune them back like that. You'll see some people even remove lower branches to kind of limb them up. Personally, I don't really like that so much. And you'd want to do that now. Again, I'd feel a little better if we had a conversation at the clinic or send me an email on that to make sure I understand the question. Of course, when we're doing that, the plant's going to respond by regenerating new growth that's in there. And some of the magnolias are huge and sometimes they're just planted in the wrong space and so on like that. So yeah, I feel better seeing it in detail. And hey, Sal,
Okay.
I think Professor Larry's doing a pruning workshop
Yes.
for us on Sunday too.
Yeah, and it's full because he does hands-on. But if you're signed up, that's great. If you're not and you have questions for us, please let us know because we are of course happy to help. But yeah, it's full. So
Okay, couldn't have brought that up then if it's full.
yeah, sorry. All righty. I have a couple of comments for you that came in. One person said, For anybody who needs their tools sharpened, we have a person who comes to the Vienna Farmers Market who will sharpen gardening tools reasonable. And another person who says remembers the trucks, and she says they did scissors and had a bell like the ice cream man. So
Yes, yeah, we're probably about the same generation. I have all fond memories of all that. Yeah, ringing the bell and the ice cream truck.
yeah. All right. Next question. Is it time to prune Bradford pear now? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, again, I'm gonna say I really, really like to do this stuff in February, but you know, I got the COVID, and so we
yeah, I
did
know.
stuff, and I'm like, well, I still want to do this class, but just
You
tell you,
tried. Yeah, we tried. We thought we were gonna make it back in, but it's okay. You're here now. I'm glad you're better. All right, next question. What is the best pruning saw?
I really do like I like Felco and Pruning. I prefer the folding blade because when I'm pruning, I can just I can fold it up. I can slip that in my back pocket. And this thing is easily, it's got I think a 6-inch blade on it. So the kind of pruning I'm doing, it suits all my needs. If you're working on larger trees though, then you might need to step up to one that has a little bit larger blade. Since we're talking about a pruning saw, the teeth go backwards. I don't know if you can, maybe you can see it like this. So as you pull, it cuts because the teeth are there. These teeth are very wide and open, so it's meant for cutting green wood. So it's sticky green wood. It doesn't clog up and it comes out there. So pruning saw is different from a carpenter saw. Trying to use a carpenter saw on green wood, not much fun.
That's good to know.
But this is Felco. Corona makes an excellent one. Some people, like commercial arborists, usually have what they call a fixed blade. It doesn't fold up, but they're using it on larger trees and everything. I do like the convenience of a folding one.
Okay. Next question. Can I prune my fig tree at 4 feet? Or I guess it sounds like 4 feet. Right now it's 6 feet and it's very hard to reach the figs, which is sad. You want to make sure you can reach all the figs. Can you do that?
I'm hesitating a little bit because I'm not the best with figs.
Okay.
So the thing is, I know you can do it. Absolutely, you can do it without hurting the tree. The question really is, there are flower buds on there now. So in doing that, you are going to diminish your harvest figs. A lot of times we get 2 seasons of harvest. And if I cut it now, I'm taking my first crop off of there, which is usually your best crop. So if it's really big and you're willing to sacrifice some fruit this year, I would say go for it. And that might just be the best thing to do. The worst thing that will happen is it'll cost you some figs.
Okay.
It's a big price to pay.
Yes, it is. Alrighty, let's see. We got a couple more minutes here, so we'll see how many of these we can get through. Is it too warm now to prune a Kusa dogwood tree?
No, I would just do it as soon as possible. What happens, my concern is I usually don't like to prune in early spring because the sap is flowing now. And so sometimes when you make these cuts, particularly like maples, are going to be some of the worst, maples and birch and elm. Some of these, we use this term bleeders. You're going to get sap flowing and oozing from there. You know, that I like to avoid that, but sometimes that's the way life is. It happened. We're having this early spring. So I would go for it. I wouldn't hesitate. I've never had this problem of bleeding on Kusa dogwood, so I don't have any hesitation. Again, I was pruning my Kusa dogwood just 2 nights ago. Just try to get to as soon as you can.
Okay. How far down near the ground do you prune red twig and yellow twig dogwood?
Again, this depends on the effect that you're after. Some people that want, let's say this, let me use it as an example. If you're thinking more just, I'm going to use almost like as a floral plant, you can cut these down, literally almost down to the ground, down here to where it's only a few inches tall. Just chop it off, and you get this proliferation of new stems coming up. And that essentially keeps all these bright red twigs. You can use it for nice floral arrangements and stuff, but you've also changed the form of the plant. If it's a larger shrub, and I'm using it more as what I'm going to call a landscape plant, and I want the larger size, then I would do more of that kind of thinning where I go in and I don't cut the whole plants down. But some of these branches, I would thin them, I cut them out to, again, induce more branches because it's these young juvenile ones that give you the brightest coloration in there. So up at Longwood Gardens is an example. They grow this where they cut it down every year. Every year it comes up with these bright little stems, but it never really achieves its full size. If you want shrub form, just be a little more gentle on it.
All right, let's see. It is 3:01. I'm going to go ahead and take this last question that came in before that, and then we will stop for the day. Sorry, everybody. For butterfly bush, should you employ rejuvenation pruning each year?
Oh yeah, somebody did mention butterfly bush. Sorry, I forgot that. Yeah, they respond really well. Also to pruning, if it's some of the larger varieties and they're getting big, at this time of year, it's the appropriate time. You can go in and do a rejuvenation pruning. Much like the crepe myrtle, they'll sprout back and they'll still flower for you this summer, so it doesn't disturb their flowering. I will tell you again, this is a lot of personal choice. I keep saying not right or wrong. If you want to do more of a thinning type of stuff where you just thin out branches, reduce their height somewhat, they respond to that really well. Also, it ultimately depends on what you want that plant to be in terms of size and shape, but you really can't hurt it.
Okay. All righty. Well, we have gone 2 minutes over, so we'll go ahead and conclude for today. Again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to follow up with us, and the recording will be on our YouTube channel. Usually it's about 24 hours, so that will be available. David, do you want to close out with any information?
Just tell you have fun with it. Plants are really, really forgiving. Remember those pointers I said about trying not to injure the branch collars on there. That's really trees, shrubs. We don't think so much about that. But have fun. Go out there, experiment. Like I said, plants forgiving. I know there's always like concern or alarm. Hey, if you make a mistake, they'll allow you to come back and fix it within a couple years or so. So have fun with it, experiment. There's no rights and wrongs on this.
All righty. Well, thank you so much. It's good to see you. I'm glad you're back in the office. And everybody have fun pruning. Have a good afternoon. Bye.
Bye-bye.